presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, and if anything seems to go wrong at any point, let me know. At some point during the presentation, I will be kind of going from the presentation to a web browser for part of our live demo. So if anything doesn't show, please let me know as I'm going along. I expect that the presentation will take about 40-45 minutes tonight, somewhere in that ballpark. And yeah, I'm excited to be here. So as Dennis said, my name is Chad Whitko, and I am part of the National Audubon Society, as well as Audubon's Migratory Bird Initiative. So tonight I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Migratory Bird Initiative, or what you might hear me refer to as MBI. And part of what I'll present on tonight will not only be the initiative itself and a little bit of our work, but also our Bird Migration Explorer. And the Bird Migration Explorer, I'll show a live demo later on, so everybody can be more familiar with it. The Bird Migration Explorer has been live now for about a month. Actually, it launched 2 months. It launched in September or in November now. So 2 months ago, we launched our Bird Migration Explorer. And so yeah, welcome to tonight's presentation, and I look forward to answering any of your questions at the end. Okay. So to start off, migratory birds are being lost at an alarming rate. Something of 3/4 of bird species in the United States and Canada are migratory. Now, recent science tells us that we've lost roughly 1 out of every 4 North American migratory birds since 1970. That's roughly 2.5 billion birds that have been lost in a single lifetime. And now we know from our climate science that the future isn't looking bright for many of these same species. Now, as you know, migratory birds tell us about the health of our environment, not only where we live, but across the hemisphere, across the Americas. Birds are the proverbial canary in the coal mine. Birds tell us, right? And birds are ecosystem indicators, and they respond rapidly to environmental change. So by protecting birds in the places they need, we also protect the places that other wildlife and people rely on as well. Clean water, air, wild spaces. These things all benefit birds, wildlife, and humans alike. Now, more than half of the migratory bird species we see in our communities spend more than half of their year outside of the United States. These are truly international travelers. And to protect migratory birds, we need to work across borders and hemispheres to protect the places they need and address the challenges they face on the breeding grounds, the non-breeding grounds, and along their migration routes. Here on the slide, we see a map of Swainson's hawk, which is taken from our Bird Migration Explorer. And as you can see, Swainson's hawk are found widely throughout the American West. And when they migrate through Mexico, narrow corridors in Central America, and all the way down into a small region in Argentina and South America known as the Pampas. And this is one of the longest migration routes of any migratory raptor in the Americas. So protecting migratory birds requires us to work together across the hemisphere. Only then can we protect species like the Swainson's hawk across their journeys. Now, advances in migration science and technology help us understand bird migration to achieve impactful conservation. Part of this stems from new technology and analyses, which allows us to track smaller and smaller species, such as this red-eyed vireo. And this is allowing us to illuminate their incredible journeys, sometimes for the first time. Their inclusion into our science, into our understanding of migration, helps us to better understand how to have and achieve impactful conservation. Now, part of my job, as Dennis mentioned, is working with data holders, building relationships, taking in data. And I can say for sure that new studies are published nearly every day, but these data are scattered. They're among many different reports and scientific journals. And in many cases, they aren't accessible easily to people outside of academic institutions or scientific agencies. Even myself, in a place like Audubon, it takes a lot of work to get these data in. So in 2018, Audubon's Migratory Bird Initiative was launched in the fall with a vision of securing the future of migratory birds across the Western Hemisphere. And to do this, we envisioned that it would take working across 4 fronts. The first is identifying the places that migratory birds need to thrive across the Americas. Then protecting the places that matter most. Of course, reducing threats. And finally, engaging people in the wonder of migration. As people learn, as people care, they're more likely to act. So to accomplish this, MBI consolidates millions of data shared by hundreds of scientists and institutions to reveal the most complete understanding of where, when, and how we need to act across the hemisphere to protect our migratory birds. And for our work, for MBI's work, in the Bird Migration Explorer especially, we've consolidated data for 458 species. This data includes tracking data, connectivity data, and range and abundance data. So for tracking data, probably around half of North America's migratory birds still aren't tracked. However, for the Bird Migration Explorer, there are roughly 184 species with tracking data, such as this American white pelican example, that can be found in the Bird Migration Explorer. This includes some 13,000 tracks from around 9,000 individuals, representing more than 520 migration studies from hundreds of researchers and institutions across many sectors. Now, tracking data is derived from technologies like GPS, satellite, light geolocator devices, and these show us pathways, the individual tracks that birds have taken from one place to another. With connectivity data, such as banding data, modus data, and genetic data, this is less of a pathway and more of an indication of where birds were initially observed and then where they were relocated, going from points A to B. And so for this part of the Bird Migration Explorer, we've pooled some 4.2 million connections across 386 species. So a lot of data have come in here. Some of this is banding data, which you're familiar from many banding stations. The other data comes in from modus, also a new technology type that many people are familiar with. And then the final type of data that we take in comes in from eBird status and abundance data, as well as ranges and BirdLife International range maps. These help give us the overall footprint of birds as they're migrating through. Now, as they say, it's a famous, expression, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, I like to think that it takes a hemisphere to conserve our birds. And conserving migratory birds is a hemispheric challenge that requires a hemispheric solution. And MBI is doing this by partnering with science, conservation, and technology organizations. To this end, we have created partnerships with more than 280 scientists, institutions, and agencies, including many of the founding partners that you see here on the screen. So the Migratory Bird Initiative uses the science we've consolidated for conservation, policy, and engagement work. And the work we do falls into three interrelated buckets. Of course, one of the major areas that we do is create digital engagement tools like the Bird Migration Explorer, which I will go into more depth on shortly, of course. And the Explorer provides maps and information that helps inform and influence decisions that benefit birds and drive grassroots engagement. It also helps to identify data gaps. Looking through the work that we do, we're able to now see which species have been tracked, which haven't been tracked enough, and which areas of the continent need more work. The second major area is our conservation applications work, in which we provide scientific support for Audubon's ongoing conservation work and strategic conservation planning and decision-making. And the third area of work is network engagement. This includes working with our network to collect new migration data and also integrating migration science into education and engagement programs. For MBI, this is a newer component of the work, and we hope to expand on this more and more each year. Now, that includes our efforts to engage more closely with chapters and campus chapters, and using tools like the Bird Migration Explorer and the conservation policy and engagement work that everyone in these areas do. So we've heard a lot about the Bird Migration Explorer so far. So here's an introduction to the Bird Migration Explorer, or the Explorer, for tonight's purposes. So the Explorer is a first of its kind interactive digital platform that combines different types of migration data, as I showed earlier, to do three primary things. One, reveal the amazing journeys of our migratory birds. I mean, these journeys and their stories are nothing short of spectacular. Two, show how they connect us to places and people across the hemisphere. These birds are not just our birds. They're traveling across the Americas, across many geopolitical boundaries. And it's amazing to think about the places these birds go and how they connect us to those places and those people. And finally, the Bird Migration Explorer helps us understand the widespread challenges that birds face throughout their journeys. Of course, as they're traveling long distances, they're facing many types of challenges and threats, and we can do better about conserving them by addressing these. Now, it's important to note that the Bird Migration Explorer is entirely free. It's available in English as well as Spanish if you were to visit Explore Aves. Now, the Explorer was designed with two general audiences in mind: birders and bird curious, and then conservation practitioners and conservation advocates. As you might guess, chapters fall into both of these audiences pretty squarely. So ultimately, the Explorer's purpose is to engage people in the wonder of migration, raise awareness to the broad scale of challenges that migratory birds face, show people how local actions can make hemispheric impacts, and to instill a sense of connection and responsibility for taking actions to protect birds where they live, locally and far away. And I'll dive into all of this when we do the demo, but as we get into the Bird Migration Explorer, there's going to be three main components that we dive into. The first are our migration maps. These are one of the flagship elements of the Explorer. Migration maps show us the places birds use across the full annual cycle to improve hemispheric outcomes. These maps show a more complete picture of the important places that birds use across the hemisphere, which informs the work of Audubon across the Americas to halt the declines we've seen in migratory birds over the last number of decades. Now, these science-based maps, which I've helped to fortunately be a part in making, show decision makers why policies like the Migratory Bird Protection Act and the Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Act need stronger federal support. Further, and perhaps maybe arguably most importantly to the average viewer, they reveal in clear detail the incredible journeys of our migratory birds, birds such as this bobolink. So this is one element of the Explorer. The next element, which again I will show later on, are our location connection maps. Now, these maps show the hemispheric impact of local actions and instill a sense of connection and responsibility for protecting places far away that our local migratory birds depend on. I mean, quite often we hear about conservation efforts that need to take place in some disparate area, not knowing perhaps that those locations, if we were to work towards helping to conserve them, even though they're not near our local area, would probably help protect many of the local birds that we see in our own backyard. So these maps help show some of that. They're interactive and they show us where the migratory birds in our communities travel. Now, we think that these connection maps can be used to instill a sense of responsibility and stewardship for protecting birds and habitats where we live, as well as faraway places. They also illustrate the hemispheric impact or reach of local threats and conservation solutions. Location maps send clear and powerful messages to decision makers that local actions can scale up to hemispheric impacts. That's one thing I think as we go through the presentation tonight and the demo, you really gain a sense of how hemispheric these birds are if you haven't already. So on this map, we see an example of Chicago, Illinois, and you can see the places that Chicago is connected to through birds that have been tracked or banded. And local restoration efforts in the Great Lakes, such as around Chicago, provide breeding and migratory stopover habitat for migratory birds. And you can imagine that those restoration efforts are helping them make that part of the journey a little bit easier as they complete their full annual cycle. Now, the third main element of the Bird Migration Explorer is our conservation challenge maps. Now, these provide advocates with data and maps to influence policies at state, national, and even international levels. These maps combine weekly maps of bird distributions and abundance with the footprint of conservation challenges to show where, when, and how extensively birds are exposed to human activities and environmental changes as they migrate throughout the year. Said differently, you can say that conservation challenge maps show us the bird's exposure or co-occurrence with a human activity or environmental change. They do not show impacts, however, but they can show us regions where we should focus our conservation work. Now, anybody that's been out west is probably familiar with this beautiful large sandpiper, the long-billed curlew. So this map here shows the exposure of long-billed curlews to areas of anthropogenic groundwater depletion. And you can understand a little bit about them if you think about their use of irrigated agricultural areas, particularly in places like the Central Valley. And this map shows us that, in the Central Valley, there's large dark red dots. Those large dots are showing us that there's high abundance of long-billed curlews. And the darkness shows us that they're exposed there's a high exposure, I should say, to areas that have groundwater depletion. Now, all of this is a consequence of water use. So if we think about it, if groundwater is managed poorly in these regions, well, then long-billed curlews could have some issues and suffer ultimately. It also shows us areas where we can possibly improve the situation, have an impact. And so if these areas were managed properly or better, such as through bird-friendly agricultural practices, well, these same long-billed curlews that face and interact with a conservation challenge might actually be able to do better in these areas. So that's the conservation challenge maps. Again, there's three main areas. There's species migration maps, species connection maps, location connection maps, and then conservation challenges. So I'm going to exit out of this and then show you a live demo of the Bird Migration Explorer. Let's see here. Dennis, can someone confirm, are you guys still seeing the, are you seeing the website? Okay. So here we are at the Bird Migration Explorer. You can get here birdmigrationexplorer.org or explorer.audubon.org. Both will take you here. So welcome, here we are. And you can see here that the Explorer is our guide to the heroic annual journeys made by over 450 bird species and the challenges they face along the way. And by using this Explorer, we can learn more about species, migratory birds at a specific location, or conservation challenges. So as I said, there's three main areas of the Explorer that when you're here, you can dive into. So you can look up bird species, you can look up locations, and you can look up conservation challenges. There's also a fourth one, you see in the upper right-hand corner, for taking action. So if you haven't yet, you can sign up to join the Audubon flock and take action to protect migratory birds. So here we are on the main page. Now this main page we refer to as our migration journeys page. It shows the tracks of over 9,000 individual birds from 184 different species. All our maps are zoomable, so you can zoom in and see different elements of these maps. Now, these data were contributed generously by researchers from over 400 migration studies. So there is hundreds of individuals, hundreds of studies involved in putting this together. Now, one thing I want to point out at any point in time, if you're using any of our pages, our maps, is if you want to learn more, there's a few ways in which you can do that. The first is the map layers box in the upper right-hand corner. It'll be on every page that you go to. This box will show you all the different layers that are available on a given map. You can also show descriptions for each of these layers by hitting the Show Descriptions button at the bottom. You can also hide these again. These maps allow you to turn on and turn off different types of data depending upon what you want to view. So if you're interested, you could turn on just raptor data and see all the raptor tracking data that we've brought into the Bird Migration Explorer. For me, I think the real power in turning all of them on for the different taxonomic groupings of birds, land birds, raptors, shorebirds, waterfowl, etc., is that by putting them together, you really get a sense of the scale of migration for these birds. And it's also really neat to see how just their tracking data alone, if you were to take away the base map, you would actually see the outlines of the major continents. You would see our major coastlines, our major river valleys, major mountain ranges. These birds are incredible migrants. And this, I think, puts it into really just plain view, like these journeys are just really incredible to witness. So any map, you can look here for the map layers to help you out. Down in the lower right, we have a data providers page. So the data providers panel is a panel that lists all of the studies that are included in any given map. So here you see all the different studies, all the citations, the researchers involved, all the links where the data were collected. So this was carefully curated by myself and others on our team because it's really important that we show all the people that were involved in this. In many cases, these data aren't from Audubon, and it's really important to show where they come from. Now, what's really neat about this data providers panel is that this data providers panel is dynamic. So whatever map you go onto, as the data changes, as you adjust the data, this data providers panel will adjust accordingly. So it's a dynamic component of our Bird Migration Explorer. One of the final things I want to show from the main page is if you want to learn more about the Explorer, you can go to the bottom left where it says learn more about the Explorer here, or go to the top right, click the little hamburger icon as it's called for the menu, and go to the About Bird Migration Explorer dropdown. This will open up a whole series of pages where you can read more about the Bird Migration Explorer. You can see who was involved, what their roles were. You can read about our supporters, our donors, our partners. All our founding partners are listed at the bottom. You can read more about each of those here. Of course, importantly, the data providers, all the hundreds of institutions, all the just countless studies that were involved if you're interested in learning what those might be. And then each of the main areas that we talked about, the bird species maps, connections maps, the conservation challenge maps, each of these have their own page that tells you a little bit more about what is going on in each of these. So you can really dive in and learn a lot more. Now, at any point in time, if you want to go back to the main page, click the Audubon icon on the left. That's kind of our home button. So I think one of the first things that many people will want to explore when they're here are the bird species. So you can go up to the top where it says bird species, or if you're on the home page, you can click any of these reddish orange buttons on the left. So doing so brings us to our bird species Explorer panel. While you're here, you can scroll through any of the 458 species that we have. Here they're listed alphabetically. You can also toggle this here on the right and change it to taxonomic. So if you're more of a scientist or a hardcore birder, you can go based on taxonomy. You can also filter by taxonomic groupings to see which birds are here. So you can deselect the whole amount of birds and you can say, I want to look up grebes and loons. And here it'll bring up all the grebes and loons that are in our Bird Migration Explorer. And you can do that for any of the groups here. You can choose species by location. You can choose species by the data technology that we have, as well as look up conservation challenges and see which bird species are listed under those challenges. One thing to note is as you're looking at these species here, you'll see which bird species have been tracked with individual tracking data. All our maps are dynamic, they move. You'll see the movements of all these migratory birds, but the ones that say tracked have had individual birds tracked with some type of tracking device, whether it's a GPS unit or a satellite tag, things like that. So you can search through this way, or you can go up top into the search bar and pick a species that you're interested in. So in this case, we're going to look up American golden plover. So this will take us to the annual migration map for American golden plover or any species. that we have. And you will see that this map is in motion. And this map is comprised primarily of tracking data as well as eBird models. And those eBird models are really thanks to all the birders that put in their eBird checklist. So if you submit eBird checklists, they get turned into the models that Cornell does, and eventually those types of models come into other scientists' hands, such as ourselves. And so we're really grateful for that contribution. So here you can see the American golden plover in action, the map in action. Again, you can look at the map layers panel on the right. It's kind of the legend of all the data that's going on. And you can see that you can turn on descriptions for all of these if you want to read more about what each of these technology types is or what the layers are. And you can hide these as well. So on this map, you'll see that there's different types of individually tracked birds. There's those that have been tracked with high precision devices. These are devices typically like GPS, and those with low precision devices. These are typically light level geolocators. These are little devices that collect basically sunlight, and based on the number of hours of sunlight and when solar noon is and things like that, scientists can triangulate on the Earth the latitude and longitude. However, it's less precise. It has a much wider range of error. Now, the one thing about light level geolocators, these purple dots that are moving, is that they actually don't do a good job of capturing data during the equinox period. So it's just a function of dealing with sunlight. And so we show this here by this gap in tracking data, these like little ghosted halos that you see. This is just showing that we don't actually have a knowledge of where that bird was at that point in time. And it's just kind of indicating that there's some gap in the data. Now, all the data that you're looking at here, you can turn on this thing called Journey of a Tracked Bird layer if you choose. It's toggled off to make the maps a little bit cleaner. These are basically the footprints of all the movements of birds throughout the year. It's a summary of all the moving birds that you see. So you get a good sense of where these birds are migrating in one static image. And of course, you can turn this off. Now, the next layer that we have here going down is the abundance of the species. So these are coming from eBird models, as I mentioned earlier. These brown dots have varying sizes. The larger dots, of course, are showing higher abundance. Now, we're zoomed way out, so you can zoom in and get a better sense of what are the abundances based on eBird data for American golden plovers as they come up. So we have these hexagons, and the further in you go, these hexagons will show when they come back through, and the map is scalable, it's dynamic. So, as you zoom in, it's not going to stay this big thing. It's going to zoom into an appropriate scale based on the size of the map that you're looking at. And then finally, at the very bottom here, we have species ranges by season. Just like any field guide has some type of species range, so do our maps. I'm going to turn off some of these extra layers just to clean it up a bit. So here we have summer ranges and winter ranges for American golden plovers. They don't really stay year-round anywhere. And they're coming from these areas high up in the Arctic and tundra. They're going all the way down here, down into South America. And so these maps are pretty new and novel. They're based on eBird for the most part, with BirdLife International range maps coming into play as well. There's also some Audubon staff vetting a lot of these and creating kind of maps that are most accurate for what we understand. Again, the data providers panel down at the bottom can also be clicked up. I'm going to minimize this. And this will show you all the individual studies for American golden plover. As you can see, this is just for these birds on this map. So this is a dynamic panel. Okay. The next thing to note on the map is the timeline on the bottom. I'm going to pause it. So you can pause this timeline. Now, when you start a new map, the timeline should always start around the week of the year that you are in. So, starting a new map, it should start sometime, if you're to do it, now in the middle of November. Once this is paused, you can grab this blue slider and you can move it around. So you have control. You can zoom in as far as you want or out as far as you'd like. You can slow it down. You can really focus in on where birds are migrating during a particular time of year, and you have control to see it at the speed that you would like. Another neat feature is that you can take the boundaries of this bar and drag it out to see a summary that is a little bit wider in time. So in this example, as you can see on top of the slider, there's these little bars at the top that say migration. These show the migration periods. And so we can see here during the entirety of the migration period for fall, where American golden plovers have been tracked have been. Now, what's really neat about these maps is that if you ever wanted to share them with somebody, instead of just saying, hey, go to this and see this, you can share the exact map that you're looking at. Just by going to the share icon down here in the lower right, this little box with an arrow pointing up. Simply by clicking that, you're going to see that there is a link that comes in for this species map that you were on. All you have to do is copy the link, send it off. You can send it to friends, family, colleagues, decision makers, policy makers, conservationists, whoever you want. And they can see the map that you were wanting them to see. Now, if you send just the link as it is, it'll send them basically the default map for that species. But there's a little option here that says include map specifics, like current map view, zoom level, or position. So you can toggle the features on and off. You can zoom in the way you like. And if that's the map you want to share, you just click that button and then copy the link and off you go. Now, one of the cool things that I think people might overlook because they get sucked into the images of these birds and their migrations is all the information that's here on the left panel. So we have a conservation statistics dropdown, which shows you all the information that we could provide regarding the main conservation stats for these birds, including their vulnerability to climate, their global population size, continental importance, and the IUCN Red List category. Of course, what would Audubon be without stories, right? So you can look at related stories. So all of our species, if they have a story that's related to them in some way, whether it's about the species, their conservation challenges, the researchers studying them, these will be here on each panel. Every species will have 3 available maps: the main migration map, a species connection map, and a conservation challenges map. And we'll see each of those other 2 coming up.
Created an enormous monopoly with a wingspan that covers everything from artist management to concert promotion to venue management to ticketing. And when you put a firm together that has that kind of market power.
Dennis, I'm hearing somebody else coming through. I think Bobby. Okay. Thank you. And then on the left panel here, the other thing I wanted to say is on the bottom, there's related links. So if you click on this, one of the main related links is that it'll take you to Audubon's Field Guide to North American Birds, the entry for that species. So here we are with our bird migration maps, our species maps. I'll just look up another one just to show what this looks like in action. So here we go with broad-winged hawks. These are one of my favorite migrants here in the east. I'm located in southern Vermont, by the way, so I'm not far from Connecticut. And these birds, it's taking a little bit to load, I see. These birds here, they migrate all the way from, the eastern part of the US through Central America and down into parts of South America, like the Amazon. And tracking studies from researchers like Lori Goodrich at Hawk Mountain, they've illuminated that these birds are going to places that we previously maybe didn't know that they were going to before. So here you can see just these great migrations for broad-winged hawk. Anybody that's been to a hawk watch in the east, I'm sure marvels at these birds. And again, you can see all the different things here on the left, including, here's an article that I had authored about research where Lori Goodrich, one of the researchers here, deployed more tags on birds in New Hampshire, and I believe they might have partnered with other folks in Connecticut as well. Okay, so those are bird species maps. Next, we're going to go down to our location maps. So clicking on the locations bar at the top, you can do that, or if you want, you can go back to the main page and click locations on the left, the orange button. Either way, it's your choice. It'll end up in the same place. So this opens up our Locations Explorer panel. Now, when you're here, you're going to see that there's some featured locations. Okay, there's about a dozen featured locations here at the bottom. These are migration hotspots across the Western Hemisphere that we think make good migration connections maps. And we can look at Delaware Bay just to see how this looks when it first comes up. And I'll actually come back to this as a second example to dive in a little bit further. So that's one way of doing it. You have all these great selections to choose from, wide variety of places throughout the Western Hemisphere. You can also search for a location. So if you go to the search bar, you can click near me. So that's wherever your geographic location is. So for me, that'd be Southern Vermont. Or in this case, I'll look up Guilford, Connecticut as an example. So here we go for the locations map for Guilford, Connecticut. This map is something that shows you all the places that Guilford is connected to across the hemisphere through migratory birds that have been tracked or banded. And so you can see Guilford, Connecticut is connected all the way from Alaska and Nunavut all the way down Peru, Brazil, all the way down to Argentina. So it's connected to a wide portion of the Western Hemisphere. Now this map, it's important to note, is based on millions of re-encounter data points from tracking banding, also radio telemetry data and genetic information. Now, on the left in the sidebar, again, there's a lot more information that you probably want to dive into. First is starting to where all the countries are that Guilford is connected to. And you can see all the list of countries, there's actually more. The number of species that Guilford is connected to that country with, and the number of individual birds. Obviously, Guilford, not surprisingly, is connected to other points in the US and Canada, but it's connected to Cuba, Haiti, Peru, Bolivia, all the way down, all the way down. There's just these amazing connections that you can find here. You can also look on the left at conservation sites near your chosen location. So you can see some areas here that I'm sure some of you are familiar with. And you can look at Audubon near you. And here you can see some Audubon related entities. Some of them I'm sure look very familiar to you. So it's a really cool feature here that you can play around with, see where Guilford is connected to, the birds that the places, the conservation areas. Really, really wonderful tool. Now zooming in a little bit. Guilford is selected here on the map. We can hover over and we can choose secondary locations. And so we can see that by choosing these other locations, we can see that Guilford is connected to those locations through a number of individual tagged birds of a number of species. So this location here, 17 tagged birds of 7 species. Now, what if we were to go down to the Tampa area? 102 tagged birds of 14 species. So you can click there, and on the left, we'll see that we connected to Lakeland, Florida, and we can see all the species that have been tracked or banded that Guilford, Connecticut is connected with, or through, I should say. So it's pretty neat. Now, I'm pretty curious about this. So we have points way down here. So where is Guilford connected to in Argentina, and what are the birds? So it's just listing Chile and Argentina down at the base. And it's one bird, one individual track bird, and perhaps not surprisingly, it is an Arctic tern, one of our most beloved long distance migrants. You can also see a conservation area that is available for us to possibly explore down in that area. So taking this map one step further, we have a species on the left that we're interested in on their connection map. So we can click this in this case. So we click on Arctic tern. This brings up the connections map for Arctic tern that shows where individual hexagons connect to other hexagons from Arctic terns. So you can click on a single hexagon and see, okay, as I click on a given hexagon, I can see the places that Arctic terns that have been encountered there, where they've also been re-encountered again. So really, really cool to see these birds and their connections. Now, this can be very circular in how you explore the explorer. And so now you're kind of in the Arctic tern species panel on the left. And if you want, you can go back to the species migration map. So here we are looking at that familiar map, this time with Arctic terns. Many of them have been tagged with light level geolocators. And as you can see, these birds are spending our winters, their non-breeding period, around the shelf ice of Antarctica, migrating down through our two major ocean basins here in the Americas, the Atlantic and Pacific. You can see these birds eventually coming up and then finding their way to their breeding areas, you know, even in places like New England. You know, we have Arctic terns breeding on a few of our islands in New England. Okay. Now, we've looked at the bird species panels. We looked at the location explorer panel. Now we're going to look at conservation challenges. So conservation challenges, these maps show us the footprint of select human activities and environmental changes across the hemisphere. These are the maps when I showed you earlier. This was the long-billed curlew example. So as you're going through this, you can see that there's 19 available challenges to explore. Scrolling down, you're going to see major categories such as agriculture and aquaculture, as well as the available data layers underneath each of those. Now, it's important to think about this in a sense that knowing that Audubon works with partners across the hemisphere to solve challenges for many of these, such as conservation ranching and our Lights Out programs. Now, as a reminder, these maps only show the footprint of human activities and environmental changes. It's important to remember that these maps do not show all threats at all times in all places or to all species. And it's also important to remember that these maps do not estimate the impacts to bird populations. Instead, they help us gain new patterns, new insights, and look for a better way to do bird conservation with partners across the hemisphere. So slowly scrolling through, we're going to choose light pollution, something that's probably pretty familiar to a lot of folks. So light pollution, here we have the light pollution conservation challenge map. We can zoom in and pan around as we can with all the maps. We can choose a location of interest, and we can see how many species are exposed to this challenge from that location. And on the left, we can see on the species panel, we can see which species are impacted by that possible exposure. Okay, so let's choose a species here. And choose a good example that I think many folks will be familiar with. We're going to choose the blackpoll warbler. So this is the blackpoll warbler and light pollution map. So again, looking at the map layers on the right, we can see there's an abundance component to this. These are these hexagons with the dots inside. The larger the dot, the higher the abundance, in this case, the blackpoll warblers in that area. And the color ramp goes from unlikely exposures to very high probability of exposure to this challenge. So the darker the dot, the more likely it is that this species is exposed to light pollution in this case. So whatever the challenge is. Now, I'm going to pause this for a second and take a look at the histogram at the bottom. So you get a sense here of what this exposure level is over time. You can see right around the spring period and the fall period is when blackpoll warblers are most exposed to light pollution. Now, if you know anything about their biology, this makes a lot of sense. These are when these birds are migrating, And it's also the period of time that they're flying over places like the continental US, major cities in the East, Chicago, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Miami, even places down in edges of Central and South America. And they're exposed to a lot of light pollution. Now, in the summertime, where are these birds? Well, these birds up in the summertime, they're way up in the north woods of US and Canada. And these birds don't really experience a lot of light pollution in these areas. So this, I think, makes a lot of sense. So again, just a reminder that the size of the dots is the level of bird abundance, and the color indicates the proportion of these birds that are co-occurring, in this case with areas of nighttime lights, and therefore have exposure to this type of challenge. On the left, we can see we're still in Blackpoll warbler. We're on conservation challenges maps, and you can see that there's 8 conservation challenges that this species interacts with. So we can hit back to all conservation challenges, and we can see here are the ones that Blackpoll warblers are impacted by. So they can choose communication towers as another possible threat for this migrant. And we can see how this map is going. So I'll pause that there. And then finally, we covered bird species locations and now conservation challenges, is this take action button. If you haven't yet and you're interested, you can click this again to join this Audubon flock, to learn about migratory birds and the actions that it takes to protect them. And there's also just some additional information, how to connect with Audubon locally, which everyone here is doing superbly. And this is a great way to get people engaged. So that's the Explorer demo that I have. I have two or three quick slides, and then I'll be done with the presentation. So I'll put that back up. Okay, so I'm assuming that everybody can see the presentation again. Is that correct, Dennis? Okay, great. So here we have a map that illustrates the migration journeys of more than 9,000 birds. This is that migrations journey map taken from the Bird Migration Explorer, all the individual track lines showing the different pathways of different types of birds. And this is overlaid with a map of Audubon chapters. And what does this show? Well, this shows that Audubon is local everywhere and can provide a network of places that migratory birds need across the US. Think about all these birds and where they're going, and how, as they're doing this, they're intersecting all these chapter boundaries. Now, in this map, we've added one additional layer, which is showing us the nature centers and sanctuaries from Audubon. Now, MBI is using this science that we've accumulated and trying to deliver it in ways that is available in an easy to understand process or way to show decision makers why places where Audubon works are important for our migratory birds, as well as point us to where, when, and how to take action to protect birds and their habitat. But of course, chapters, campus chapters, state offices, all you guys are doing an amazing job of getting boots on the ground and doing boots on the ground work, going to state houses and city councils, managing, restoring, and protecting habitat, and I think most importantly of all, educating others about our migratory birds. So Audubon is local everywhere. It's important to remember that. And if we coordinate our efforts, we can make sure we provide a network of sites that migratory birds need across the US. It's also important to realize that Audubon Americas, our international program, is working with local partners outside of the US to protect the places they need when they aren't with us in the United States. And finally, how can you get involved? Well, there's 3 main ways. You can contribute data, you can use the Explorer, and possibly participate in a webinar or training. So, contributing data. Many of us on this call, I'm sure, have used eBird before, and you've heard me mention eBird many times tonight. eBird checklists eventually make it into different types of analyses and models, which ultimately come into places like the Bird Migration Explorer. You can volunteer with a bird banding station if possible. And I know sometimes that some chapters have connections outside of the US. So supporting those are great. Passing on the Explorer is great with those folks. If you know any researchers that are doing tracking, putting little devices on birds, if you think that they haven't heard about the Bird Migration Explorer, definitely let them know. I would most likely be the person involved in working with them. There's a lot of data out there and not everybody does ultimately share, but ultimately, if we can get more data in, it helps build up the value and the power of things like this. And of course, if you have any conservation sites that you think are important, let us know. For using the Explorer, of course, engaging fellow members and influencing conservation decisions, use it for those if you can. There's that great share function, get the word out, share the Explorer. And of course, tell us how you're using it. It's really important to us for managing the Bird Migration Explorer moving forward, and knowing how it's being used will really impact that in a positive way. So you can email us at migratorybirds@audubon.org. Whoops. And that'll be on the final slide too. And then finally, you can participate in a webinar or training. I believe there might be some opportunities that are announced through Audubon. And you can also become a chapter champion to be trained on the Explorer and help other chapters use it. So chapter champions are people from chapters who are willing to participate in webinars and training workshops and share the use cases. It's a great opportunity for folks to kind of do peer-to-peer info sharing and training with the Explorer. So those are a few great ways, if you're able to help out to our work, to our end. And I will leave this up just for a second. This is our email address. I'm one of the primary folks that respond to this email, so you'll most likely be interacting with me. You can find the Bird Migration Explorer at birdmigrationexplorer.org or explore.audubon.org. And in Spanish, for any Spanish speakers tonight or any Spanish speakers in your life, they can find a full Spanish version of the Explorer at exploreaves.org. And that is what I have for tonight. So thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions in the remaining time we have.
If you'd like to ask a question, you can raise your hand and unmute yourself. No question, really? Well,
hopefully that means I did a good job presenting, and it's
yes, you did a great job.
Thorough enough. Yeah, as far as answering questions, sometimes with this amount of information and taking it all in, it could be a little daunting sometimes. I see Tristan.
Here we go. Tristan, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for the presentation. I look forward to experimenting with the tool. Could you clarify when you said at the beginning of the presentation that so many millions of birds have been lost, or so many species have been lost? Do you mean that they had been pushed to extinction, or do you mean that their habitat, that their range had changed, or had, that their ranges have changed?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the best way to think about it. So I'll take one step back. So that figure, that value comes out of a kind of a seminal paper that came out in 2019. Was it Science, I think it was, or Nature, one of those major publications. And basically, people in our industries were referred to as the 3 billion birds gone paper. And basically, the paper goes on to detail this loss of 3 billion birds since 1970, of which 2.5 billion, I believe, are migratory. What that's like, the best way to think about that is if you were to do in North America a population census of all the species, all the individual birds, you have a total. And 1970, then take it, to 2019, when the paper was put out, there's 3 billion less birds from 1970 to basically current day. So there's less birds on the landscape. And there's a lot of reasons why those birds aren't around. Some of it is, of course, habitat change and alterations. It's things like bird, collisions with buildings and windows, outdoor cats, pesticides, rodenticides. There's no shortage of reasons why birds have declined. There's also been various states of the birds reports that have come out for both North America and the world. And I know, here, and where we live, the majority of bird types are actually in decline. There are a few bird groups that are increasing, like waterfowl and water birds. We think primarily probably to the protection of wetlands. Sometimes definitely, owing to the fact of things like waterfowl hunting and the conservation of wetlands for hunting or conservation programs around that. So some of those birds are doing well. A lot of birds are actually declining right now. And globally, it's some astounding number. I read it a couple months ago, and it's something like 49% of all birds globally, I think, are threatened with extinction. It's some crazy number. So Tristan, does that kind of answer some of what you're asking? Oh, you're on mute, but I got what you said. I could read your lips.
It does. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And I'll just finish by saying, if there's no other questions, that we hope that the Bird Migration Explorer is a really dynamic way to connect with our migratory birds and to learn more about birds that maybe you thought you knew well. And there's obviously a lot to learn. I mean, I look at these maps all the time, and every time I look at them, there's a new story. There's a new conservation issue that I wasn't aware of. So there's a lot of information here. No shortage of things that you can dive into. I will also add that we launched this in September, and right now we are intending to periodically update the Bird Migration Explorer. So every year there'll be a number of different data sets that come in that get updated, whether they be updated eBird models or range maps. But I believe that every quarter of the year, as new tracking studies come out, we will be adding those studies into the Explorer. So every few months, the Explorer should get a little more robust. Species that aren't currently on there now will hopefully be on there at some point. I know we're looking to do a big seabird edition, hopefully, I think is one of our intentions. We'll see if that happens. And then, of course, many new species are being tracked all the time. Robin.
Hey, yeah, one of the questions I have, so I am on the Lights Out Connecticut steering committee. And so
Sure.
I loved the intersection of the migration patterns with chief threats. One of the questions I would have is, I'm assuming this is built off of Esri's ArcGIS story maps on a certain level. Is that the layering or?
Yeah, Esri is a big part of it. It's not necessarily story maps.
Custom.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a custom build.
Yeah, and then we have in one of the slides, there's other entities that we've worked with, who helped, Postlight and Blue Raster, I think, were the two entities that we worked with, and basically getting this Explorer built. But there's a high influence of Esri. A lot of it's based on Esri. Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a whole team. If you go to the Explore, learn more about the Bird Migration Explorer section, you can get there in the bottom left, where you go to the menu. You'll see the members of our team that have been involved. And so if you have any questions that are really related, to how this was built,
I can turn there. That's great. That's awesome. One of the questions I do have is probably more general than the sort of nuts and bolts of how it was built, but that is, can you do a search for multiple species that have been, their migration patterns are affected by the same threat of light pollution?
Yeah, so if you look at, I believe if you look at like light pollution as a conservation challenge,
Mhm.
sometimes, we often say threats for many of these things, but sometimes it's important to understand that some of these are not always threats to all birds, right? So they become a best way we'd like to think of as a challenge, but yeah, so you can see all the species that are, so when you go to the, trying to think of the best way to explain this, but when you go to the bird species
Mhm.
search, right? You can scroll through all the species, you can filter them down. You can filter down to the different threats, and you
Okay.
can see the list of those that are impacted or intersect with that conservation challenge.
That's
But
awesome.
there's no way, we don't really have any like multi-species layering at this
Okay.
point. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. And then the other question that I would have, it sounds like this is built off of a lot of eBird observations, so it's basically crowdsourced citizen science. And are there plans for the future with this in terms of MODIS towers?
So yeah, so MODIS data does play a part in our maps, and they help build some of the connection maps, and in some cases, I believe they're on the species migration maps if possible. You can, when you're exploring through, you can probably, go to the data providers panel or something and look through, and you'll see that a lot of MODIS studies have MODIS in the title name, and so you can see. So yeah, we work with Birds Canada for that.
Great.
And they've given us, a couple of huge data dumps of all the MODIS data.
Wonderful.
And so, just recently, actually, I was in Sharon, down at the Sharon Audubon Center
That's
with one
great.
of my colleagues. Yeah, so I was down there with,
Yeah.
so I was down there with one of my colleagues, Bill DeLuca, back in August, and he kind of was leading this effort where there was a select number of Audubon centers that MODIS towers put up. And so I helped him put up a MODIS tower at the Sharon Audubon Center.
That's great. We're thinking of it at Bend of the River as well. So,
Yeah.
TBD.
Yeah. Well, if you have questions, I've assisted on one installation, but I
Okay.
can certainly put you in touch with Bill.
Great.
He might be a good resource to help you with that.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That leads directly into a point I was going to make, Chad and Robin, and that is along the Connecticut shore, there are a number of MODIS towers stretching from the Rhode Island border to Greenwich, with a huge gap in the New Haven area between
Mhm.
Guilford and Stratford.
Ooh. Oh.
And there are a number of chapters that have talked about putting up MODIS towers in their areas, and I thought that might be a worthwhile effort for Monunketuk to take on, to put one someplace around New Haven Harbor, which would be sort of the midpoint between the two areas that do have the towers.
Yeah.
That's
Again,
awesome.
yeah, I'd say again, my colleague Bill and others at Audubon, they're probably a little more up to speed on, placements and what makes sense. The thing to think about is that more towers are almost always advantageous, especially if it's a local entity trying to contribute to their local area. And then of course there's folks who have the means to put towers up, not just where they're at in like a local sense, but they can help contribute towards towers in other parts of the country or whatnot. And the Northeast does relatively well with MODIS towers. If you look at the MODIS network on the MODIS website, you'll see that there's a huge concentration Northeast. And there's actually a lot of efforts now to put them in other places more strategically, including some areas of the Northeast, trying to create, as you're suggesting, Dennis, this kind of like, for lack of a better term, like a wall of towers, like a fence line. Especially, it's really great going through corridors because it makes sure that you're better able to capture, these birds as they're migrating through. So there could be a real benefit there. I've reached out to my colleague Bill because you had mentioned this to me, but he's been traveling for work, so I haven't had a chance to follow up. But I can certainly let you know any thoughts he may have.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Hey,
absolutely.
that's great.
Are there any other questions? That was a fantastic presentation, Chad. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And we'll look forward to exploring the Explorer and looking for updates. So thank you very much. And thank you all for joining in tonight's presentation. See you next time. Take care.